The Galactic Emperor Zekthar had ruled for 3,000 years, and in all that time, no being had ever made him smile. His massive obsidian throne sat in the center of the crystal amphitheater, where the greatest warriors from across 47 star systems came to face him in ritual combat. The rules were simple. Survive 10 minutes against the Emperor's chosen champion and earn an audience to present your petition. Fail and become another trophy in his collection. Marcus Chen wiped grease from his hands with an old rag, completely unaware that his life was about to change forever. The 32-year-old mechanic worked in the deepest levels of Station Omega-7, a massive trade hub orbiting the gas giant Nexus Prime. His small repair shop was squeezed between a Voltarian spice merchant and a cantina that served questionable alien cuisine. Marcus specialized in fixing things others had given up on: ancient Earth machinery, broken alien tech, and the occasional desperate smuggler's ship. The morning started like any other. Marcus was elbow-deep in the guts of a malfunctioning atmospheric processor when the station's warning klaxons began wailing. Through his shop's grimy viewport, he could see the source of the commotion. A massive Imperial dreadnought had just dropped out of hyperspace, its hull gleaming like polished death in the system's twin suns. Station Commander Velox, a nervous Centaurian with blue-scaled skin, appeared on every screen throughout the station. Attention all residents and visitors. His Imperial Majesty Zekthar has arrived for the monthly trials of petition. All qualifying warriors must report to Docking Bay 7 immediately. This is not optional. Marcus rolled his eyes and returned to his work. The trials were nothing new. Every month, the Emperor would show up somewhere in the galaxy, and warriors would line up to get themselves killed for the slim chance of gaining his ear. Marcus had seen it broadcast countless times on the holonet. The Emperor never looked interested, never showed emotion, and certainly never granted any petitions. It was all just elaborate theater to maintain his reputation as an unstoppable force. The atmospheric processor sparked, and Marcus jerked his hand back with a curse. "Damn piece of Rigelian junk," he muttered, then paused. An idea began forming in his mind as he looked at the faulty component. The problem wasn't with the main unit, it was with a tiny sensor that had been installed backwards. Whoever had built this thing had made a simple but critical error. Hours passed as warriors from across the system gathered on the station. Marcus could hear them through his shop's thin walls, the heavy footsteps of Krogan mercenaries, the clicking of insectoid battle drones, and the low rumble of conversation in a dozen alien languages. These weren't desperate fools. They were genuine warriors with legitimate grievances against the Empire. Trade disputes, territorial conflicts, requests for aid, all the mundane business of governing a galactic civilization. But Marcus knew how it would go. The Emperor would sit on his portable throne, looking bored while his current champion, rumor said it was a cybernetically enhanced apex predator called Grimjaw, tore through challenger after challenger. The whole spectacle would be over by evening, leaving behind nothing but broken bodies and broken dreams. Marcus's neighbor, an elderly Voltarian named Schechter, knocked on his door frame. The spice merchant's usually jovial expression was replaced by worry. "Friend Marcus, you should close shop and stay inside. These trials, they make everyone nervous. Scared people buy weapons, not repairs." "Thanks for the warning," Marcus replied, not looking up from his work. "But I've got 3 jobs to finish before tomorrow." Schechter's tentacles writhed with anxiety. "You don't understand. Sometimes the Emperor gets creative. Last time he declared that anyone who refused to participate was showing cowardice. Half the station's population ended up in the arena." This got Marcus's attention. He'd heard rumors about the Emperor's unpredictable nature, but he'd always assumed they were exaggerated. He can't just force civilians to fight, can he? "He is the Emperor," Schechter said simply. "He can do whatever he wishes." As if summoned by their conversation, the station's intercom crackled to life again. This time the voice was different, deeper, colder, carrying an authority that seemed to reach through the speakers and grab listeners by the throat. "Citizens of Station Omega-7, I am Emperor Zekthar. Today's trials have been disappointing. 37 warriors have faced my champion, and all have failed within minutes. Clearly, this system breeds weakness." Marcus felt his stomach drop as the Emperor continued. "Therefore, I am expanding today's trials. Every adult resident of this station will have the opportunity to face Grimjaw. Those who refuse will be executed for cowardice. You have 1 hour to prepare." Chaos erupted throughout the station. Marcus could hear screaming, running footsteps, and the sound of blast doors slamming shut as people tried to hide. But there was nowhere to go. The Imperial dreadnought had deployed containment fields around the entire station. "This is insane," Marcus whispered, staring at his tools scattered across the workbench. He was a mechanic, not a warrior. His only weapons were a plasma cutter and a magnetic wrench. The closest he'd come to combat was breaking up bar fights, and even then he usually just hid behind the bar until security arrived. Schechter placed a tentacle on Marcus's shoulder. Perhaps we should pray to our respective gods." Marcus looked at the atmospheric processor he'd been repairing, then at the simple sensor that had been installed backwards. Such a small mistake, but it had rendered the entire system useless. An idea began forming, crazy, desperate, but maybe their only chance. "Schechter," he said slowly, "what do you know about the Emperor's sense of humor?" The Voltarian's eye stalks swiveled in confusion. "Humor? The Emperor does not possess humor. It is said that nothing has made him laugh in 3 millennia. Some believe he is incapable of the emotion." "Everyone's capable of laughter," Marcus said, gathering his tools. "Sometimes you just need to find the right joke." "Friend Marcus, what are you planning?" Marcus hefted his tool bag over his shoulder and headed for the door. "I'm going to fix something that's been broken for 3,000 years. The walk to Docking Bay 7 felt like a funeral march. Hundreds of station residents shuffled through the corridors, their faces showing every emotion from terror to resignation. Mothers clutched children who were too young to understand what was happening. Elderly beings leaned on walking sticks, accepting their fate with dignity. Traders and shopkeepers who had never held a weapon in their lives practiced ineffective combat stances. The docking bay had been transformed into an arena. Imperial engineers had installed energy barriers to create a fighting circle, while portable seating allowed the Emperor and his retinue to watch in comfort. The bodies of fallen warriors had been arranged in neat rows along one wall, a grim reminder of what awaited the civilians. Emperor Zekthar was exactly what Marcus had expected, and yet somehow more. 3 meters tall, with skin like polished obsidian and eyes that glowed with inner fire. His armor seemed to be crafted from the heart of a dying star, and power radiated from him like heat from a forge. But it was his expression that struck Marcus most, not cruel or angry, just empty, like someone who had seen everything the universe had to offer and found it all disappointing. Standing beside the Emperor was his champion, Grimjaw. The creature had once been a proud apex warrior, but extensive cybernetic modifications had turned him into something nightmarish. Half his skull was replaced with gleaming metal, while his arms ended in retractable energy claws that hummed with lethal power. He had already killed 37 beings today, and his predator's grin suggested he was looking forward to many more. "Citizens," the Emperor's voice boomed across the bay, "you stand before me because your warriors have failed to provide adequate entertainment. Perhaps civilian desperation will prove more amusing. Who wishes to face Grimjaw first?" No one moved. The crowd pressed backward, trying to delay the inevitable. Marcus felt the weight of his tool bag and thought about his crazy plan. It was ridiculous, impossible, and almost certainly suicidal. But looking at the faces around him, the fear, the hopelessness, he realized that ridiculous might be exactly what this situation needed. Marcus stepped forward. The crowd parted around him, and he could feel hundreds of eyes watching his every step. Whispers followed in his wake. "Who is that? Just a mechanic. He's going to die? Poor brave fool." Emperor Zekthar's glowing eyes fixed on Marcus as he entered the arena. "And what are you, little being?" "Marcus Chen, your Imperial Majesty," he replied, surprised by how steady his voice sounded. "I'm a mechanic." "A mechanic." The Emperor's tone suggested this was somehow even more pathetic than he'd expected. "And what petition do you bring before me?" Marcus set down his tool bag and began unpacking his equipment with deliberate care. "Well, Your Majesty, I've been looking at your operation here, and I've noticed a problem." For the first time in 3,000 years, someone had told Emperor Zekthar he had a problem. The arena fell completely silent. Even Grimjaw stopped flexing his claws, uncertain how to process what he'd just heard. "A problem?" the Emperor asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "Oh yes," Marcus continued, pulling out a small diagnostic scanner. "See, I specialize in fixing things that are broken, and this whole setup you've got here, it's definitely broken." The Emperor's retinue exchanged nervous glances. Several Imperial guards began reaching for their weapons, but Zekthar held up a hand to stop them. His expression hadn't changed, but Marcus thought he detected the faintest hint of curiosity. "Explain." Marcus gestured toward the rows of dead warriors. "Look at all this waste. 37 qualified fighters dead. That represents thousands of hours of training, millions of credits in equipment, decades of experience, all thrown away in minutes. From a mechanical standpoint, it's incredibly inefficient." "Efficiency," the Emperor repeated slowly, as if tasting an unfamiliar word. "Exactly. Now I'm not questioning your right to do this," Marcus added quickly. "But as a professional, I have to ask, what exactly are you trying to accomplish?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Emperor Zekthar had ruled for 3 millennia, conquered countless worlds, commanded the loyalty of trillions. And now a human mechanic was asking him to explain himself. "I maintain order through strength," the Emperor said finally. Marcus nodded thoughtfully and made a note on his scanner. "Okay, that's your objective, but this current system isn't achieving it efficiently. You're getting compliance through fear, which is unstable and requires constant reinforcement. Plus, you're burning through resources at an unsustainable rate." Grimjaw growled impatiently. "Master, let me end this mockery." "No," the Emperor said, his gaze never leaving Marcus. "Continue, mechanic." Marcus felt sweat beading on his forehead but pressed on. "The problem is in your feedback loop. You're not getting useful data from these trials. Everyone who faces your champion dies quickly, so you never learn anything new about potential threats or improvements. It's like, imagine if I tested engines by running them until they exploded. Sure, I'd know which ones were weak, but I'd never figure out how to make them better." He pulled out his plasma cutter and began adjusting its settings while he talked. "Plus, there's the motivation issue. These warriors aren't fighting to win, they're fighting not to die. That's completely different psychology, and it produces inferior performance." "And what," the Emperor asked, "would you suggest?" Marcus looked up from his tool with a grin that was equal parts terror and excitement. "Simple. Change the win condition." Emperor Zekthar leaned forward slightly, the first sign of genuine interest he'd shown in decades. "Change the win condition." Marcus nodded and held up his plasma cutter like a teacher demonstrating a lesson. "Right now, the only way to win is to survive 10 minutes against an opponent designed to kill quickly. That's not a test of skill or worthiness, it's just elaborate execution. But what if the goal was different? Such as, make the Emperor laugh." The silence that followed was so complete that Marcus could hear the hum of the station's life support systems. Imperial guards stopped breathing. Grimjaw's cybernetic eye flicked nervously between Marcus and his master. Even the civilians pressed against the barriers seemed frozen in disbelief. Then Emperor Zekthar did something unprecedented. He stood up. For 3,000 years, the Emperor had remained seated during trials, a symbol of his absolute authority and boredom. Rising from his throne was such an alien concept that several of his advisors immediately began checking their equipment for malfunctions. "You propose," the Emperor said slowly, "that beings should entertain me instead of fight my champion." "Not entertain," Marcus corrected, warming to his theme. "That's still the wrong framework. See, entertainment is one-sided. You watch, they perform, you judge. But laughter is interactive. It requires connection, understanding, timing. It's collaborative." He began walking around the arena as he talked, his tool bag clinking softly with each step. "Think about it, Your Majesty. When was the last time someone surprised you? Really surprised you? These warriors all use the same tactics, the same weapons, the same strategies. They're all trying to impress you with strength, but you're already the strongest being in the galaxy. Of course they bore you." Marcus stopped directly in front of the Emperor and looked up at those burning eyes. "But humor. Humor requires intelligence, creativity, the ability to see patterns others miss. It's actually a much better test of the qualities you'd want in advisors, generals, or administrators." "Interesting theory," the Emperor said, "but laughter serves no purpose in governance." "Doesn't it?" Marcus pulled out a small wrench and began adjusting something on his plasma cutter. "I've worked on a lot of different machines, Your Majesty, and I've noticed something. The ones that run best have flexible components, things that can bend without breaking, adapt to changing conditions, release pressure before it builds up dangerously." He gestured toward the assembled civilians, still cowering behind the energy barriers. "Fear makes people rigid. They follow orders exactly, never innovate, never question anything, never tell you when something's going wrong until it's too late. But beings who can laugh, they're flexible. They can handle unexpected situations, find creative solutions, adapt to new challenges. Grimjaw shifted impatiently, his claws extending and retracting in a mechanical rhythm. Master, this is foolishness. Let me demonstrate the proper way to handle insubordination. You know what's funny about that? Marcus said, turning to address the champion directly. You're the perfect example of rigid thinking. 37 opponents today, and I bet every single one tried to fight you on your terms, strength against strength, speed against speed, weapon against weapon. Am I right? The cybernetic warrior's growl confirmed Marcus's guess. See, that's the problem with being the best at something, Marcus continued, now addressing the entire audience. Everyone assumes they have to beat you at your own game, but what if someone changed the game entirely? He held up his plasma cutter, which he'd been modifying throughout the conversation. For instance, everyone who's faced Grimjaw has focused on his weapons, those nasty energy claws, the enhanced reflexes, the armor plating. But I bet nobody's paid attention to his greatest weakness. I have no weaknesses, Grimjaw snarled, taking a threatening step forward. Sure you do, Marcus said cheerfully. You're a perfectionist. The statement was so unexpected that even the Emperor blinked. Explain. Marcus pointed at Grimjaw's cybernetic modifications. Look at him. Every enhancement is precisely calibrated, every system optimized for maximum efficiency. His combat routines are probably flawless, his reaction times measured in microseconds, his targeting systems accurate to decimal points. Right. Of course, Grimjaw said proudly, I am the perfect warrior. Exactly, and that's your weakness, because perfection can't handle imperfection. Marcus grinned and raised his modified plasma cutter. Computer, analyze that large blue panel on the wall behind the Emperor. A synthesized voice responded from the tool. Analysis complete. Target appears to be decorative wall covering. Recommendation, do not engage. Override safety protocols, Marcus said. Prepare to cut. Warning, recommended action may result in property damage, personal injury, or violation of local fire codes. Yeah, that's kind of the point. Execute. Marcus fired his plasma cutter at the wall panel. Instead of the clean, precise beam the weapon was designed to produce, it let out a sputtering, irregular burst that carved a rough approximation of a smiley face into the expensive imperial decoration. The effect on Grimjaw was immediate and devastating. His cybernetic systems, programmed to respond to weapons fire with lethal precision, couldn't process what they were seeing. The plasma discharge was clearly an attack, but the target made no tactical sense. The pattern was chaotic, purposeless, inefficient. His combat algorithms locked up trying to analyze a threat that violated every principle of warfare. Grimjaw stood frozen, his enhanced reflexes paralyzed by conflicting data streams. You see, Marcus said conversationally, his systems are designed to handle warriors, beings who fight logically, with purpose, following predictable patterns. But I'm not a warrior. I'm just an idiot with a broken plasma cutter who thought it would be funny to draw on the Emperor's wall. The smiley face on the wall seemed to grin down at the arena with cheerful malevolence. Emperor Zekthar stared at the crude drawing, then at his paralyzed champion, then at the human mechanic who had just accomplished something impossible. For the first time in 3,000 years, someone had presented him with a genuine surprise. Grimjaw, the Emperor said quietly. Systems, recalibrating, unable to process. The champion muttered, his cybernetic eye spinning frantically. Grimjaw, stand down. The command broke through the system lockup, and Grimjaw stumbled backward, his combat programs finally resetting. He looked around the arena in confusion, as if seeing it for the first time. Marcus, meanwhile, had moved on to his next demonstration. He pulled a standard maintenance scanner from his tool bag and began running it over different parts of the arena's energy barriers. Now, Your Majesty, you might be thinking that was just a lucky trick, exploit the champion's programming and call it strategy, but that misses the real point. The scanner beeped as it detected various anomalies. Humor isn't about tricks or gimmicks, it's about perspective. It's about finding the unexpected angle, the connection nobody else sees. He pointed the scanner at Emperor Zekthar himself, and the device immediately began displaying readouts that made the Imperial Guards reach for their weapons. For example, Marcus continued, apparently oblivious to the sudden tension, My scanner here is reading some fascinating data about Your Majesty's biosignatures, heart rate, stress hormones, neural activity patterns. And according to these readings, you're not bored at all right now. You haven't been bored for the last 15 minutes. The Emperor's expression didn't change, but several of his advisors looked nervous. In fact, Marcus said, studying the scanner with professional interest, these readings suggest that you're more mentally engaged than you've been in. Well, the comparison database doesn't go back 3,000 years, but let's say it's been a while. He lowered the scanner and looked directly at the Emperor again. Which brings us to the real problem with your current system, Your Majesty. It's not that the trials are inefficient or wasteful, though they are. The real problem is that they're boring you to death. Literally. Marcus gestured to his scanner readings. Extended exposure to chronic boredom causes measurable neurological degradation in most species. Your brain is essentially atrophying from lack of stimulation. At this rate, you'll be completely catatonic within another 1,000 years. Impossible, one of the Emperor's advisors protested. His Majesty is immortal. Immortal, not invulnerable, Marcus corrected. There's a difference. You can live forever and still suffer from depression, dementia, or simple ennui, and from a mechanical standpoint, a bored immortal is a broken immortal. He packed his scanner away and pulled out what appeared to be a standard engineering hammer. But here's the good news: most problems that develop slowly can be fixed slowly. You just need the right approach. Marcus walked over to the arena's control console, a complex array of crystalline interfaces that managed the energy barriers, environmental controls, and combat monitoring systems. Without hesitation, he raised his hammer and gave the console a solid whack. Sparks flew, alarms blared. The energy barriers flickered and shifted, changing from their usual blue to a festive rainbow pattern that cycled through the spectrum like a disco light show. Percussive maintenance, Marcus explained as Imperial technicians rushed to assess the damage. Sometimes when complex systems get stuck in a loop, the solution is a precisely applied impact to reset the parameters. The rainbow barriers continued their cheerful dance, casting colorful shadows across the arena floor. Several of the civilians pressed against them began to smile despite their fear. The lights were undeniably pretty, and after hours of terror, pretty was a welcome change. Emperor Zekthar watched the light show with something approaching wonder. When was the last time he'd seen something beautiful without bloodshed? When had anyone last shown him something new? The barriers still contain the arena, Marcus noted, testing the field's strength with his hand. They're actually functioning better than before. The frequency cycling makes them more efficient and harder to breach. But now they're also serving a secondary function, reminding everyone present that the universe doesn't have to be gray and grim all the time. He turned back to face the Emperor, and for the first time since entering the arena, Marcus looked nervous. Your Majesty, I've made my point about changing the win condition. I've demonstrated that humor can be a more effective tool than fear. I've shown you that surprise and creativity have value, but I haven't actually made you laugh yet. The arena fell silent again. This was the moment of truth. Had the human mechanic done enough to save himself and the other civilians, or was this all just an elaborate prelude to execution? Marcus took a deep breath and reached into his tool bag one more time. What he pulled out was so mundane, so utterly anticlimactic, that several observers actually gasped. It was a rubber duck. A small, yellow, perfectly ordinary rubber duck of the type that humans had been putting in bathtubs for centuries. It looked absurdly innocent sitting in Marcus's palm, a tiny splash of domesticity in an arena designed for death. Your Majesty, Marcus said solemnly, I present to you the most advanced debugging tool in known space. The Emperor stared at the duck. His advisors stared at the duck. Grimjo stared at the duck with his one remaining organic eye while his cybernetic systems tried to classify it as a weapon. It's a duck, the Emperor said finally. Not just any duck, Marcus corrected. This is a debugging duck. When human programmers encounter a problem they can't solve, they explain the issue to this duck. And somehow, in the process of explaining the problem clearly and simply, they usually figure out the solution. He held the duck up so everyone could see it clearly. For 3,000 years, Your Majesty, you've been trying to solve the problem of maintaining order in a galaxy full of chaotic, unpredictable beings. You've used fear, force, and intimidation. But maybe what you really need is to explain the problem to someone who will listen without judgment, without agenda, without any possibility of betrayal or ambition. Marcus placed the rubber duck on the Emperor's armrest. Someone who doesn't want anything from you except maybe a warm bath and some soap bubbles. Emperor Zekthar looked down at the small yellow duck sitting on his throne. Here was a creature that felt no fear in his presence, demanded nothing, expected nothing, and offered no threats or flattery. For the first time in 3 millennia, he was in the presence of something that existed purely for its own simple purpose. And then, impossible but inevitable, Emperor Zekthar began to laugh. The sound that emerged from Emperor Zekthar was unlike anything heard in the galaxy for 3,000 years. It started as a low rumble deep in his chest, like distant thunder or tectonic plates shifting. Then it grew, building into something that might have been mistaken for an earthquake if anyone could have forgotten that they were in space. The laughter was rusty, unpracticed, as if his vocal cords had forgotten how to produce anything but commands and threats. But it was genuine, bubbling up from some long-buried part of his psyche that remembered joy. The effect on everyone present was immediate and profound. Imperial guards who had stood at rigid attention for decades suddenly found their shoulders relaxing. Advisors who spent their days calculating the most efficient ways to inspire terror discovered that their faces could produce expressions other than stern disapproval. Even Grimjaw's cybernetic systems seemed to recalibrate, his posture shifting from predatory readiness to something approaching curiosity. The civilians pressed against the rainbow barriers stared in amazement. They had come here expecting to die, prepared for pain and terror and the absolute authority of an immortal tyrant. Instead, they were witnessing something that their grandchildren would struggle to believe. Emperor Zekthar was laughing at a rubber duck. Marcus stood in the center of the arena, watching 3 millennia of accumulated tension drain out of the most powerful being in the galaxy. He had never expected his desperate gambit to work this well, and for a moment, he was genuinely afraid. What happened now? What did you do after you made an immortal emperor laugh for the first time in recorded history? The laughter gradually subsided, leaving Zekthar looking slightly dazed, as if he'd just awakened from a very long dream. He picked up the rubber duck and examined it with careful attention, turning it over in hands that could crush starships. "A debugging tool," he said finally, his voice still carrying traces of amusement. "The most effective one ever invented," Marcus confirmed. "Humans have been using them for centuries. There's something about explaining a problem to something that can't talk back that clarifies your thinking. And you believe this would help me govern the galaxy?" Marcus shrugged. "Can't hurt to try. Your current system isn't exactly producing optimal results." Emperor Zekthar looked out over his empire's representatives. The guards, the advisors, the technicians, all staring at him with expressions ranging from wonder to confusion to barely contained panic. For 3,000 years, these beings had served him out of fear and duty. None of them had ever seen him as anything other than a force of nature, as inevitable and impersonal as gravity or entropy. But now they had seen him laugh. They had witnessed a moment of genuine humanity in a being they had thought was beyond such simple emotions. The careful distance between emperor and subject had been irreparably bridged. "You realize," Zekthar said quietly, "that what you've done here today changes everything." "Changes everything?" Marcus asked. "I just suggested a better debugging method." "You made me laugh." The Emperor's eyes still glowed with their inner fire, but now there was something else there, warmth, perhaps, or simple curiosity about what might happen next. "In 3,000 years of rule, no one has ever made me laugh. Do you understand what this means?" Marcus was beginning to suspect that his simple plan had unleashed something much larger than he had anticipated. "Not really, Your Majesty. I just thought you looked like you could use some cheering up." The simplicity of the statement seemed to amuse Zekthar all over again. "Cheering up? Yes, I suppose I could." He stood from his throne and walked down to arena level, moving among his subjects without the usual barrier of protocol and ceremony. "Tell me, Marcus Chen, what would you do if you were Emperor of the Galaxy?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Marcus looked around the arena, at the rainbow barriers still cycling through their cheerful spectrum, at the civilians who were no longer cowering in terror, at the Imperial forces who seemed as surprised by their Emperor's transformation as everyone else. "Well," Marcus said slowly, "first thing I'd do is fix the trials." "How?" "Make them useful. Instead of having people fight to the death for your entertainment, have them solve problems. Real problems. There are probably thousands of issues throughout the empire that could benefit from fresh perspectives. He gestured toward the assembled civilians. You've got traders who understand economics, engineers who know about infrastructure, farmers who understand food production, teachers who know about education. Instead of killing them, put them to work. Marcus began packing as his ideas gained momentum. Set up the trials as problem-solving competitions. Present a real challenge, maybe a planet with failing terraforming systems, or a trade route that's been disrupted by pirates, or a colony that's having resource management issues. Then let teams of volunteers work together to develop solutions. And the winners? The winners get to implement their solutions with Imperial support. The losers get to learn from what worked and what didn't. Everyone gains experience, the Empire gets better governance, and you get to see real innovation instead of just watching people die. Emperor Zekthar nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. Interesting, but such a system would require trust. I would have to trust my subjects to act independently, to make decisions without my direct oversight. Trust is just another debugging tool, Marcus said. It helps you identify problems in your organizational systems. If you can't trust someone to handle responsibility, that tells you something important about either their training or your selection process. And if they betray that trust? Marcus shrugged. Then you debug that too. Figure out where the system broke down and fix it. Most problems aren't malicious. They're just misunderstandings or inadequate information or conflicting priorities. He paused, considering his next words carefully. Your Majesty, you've been ruling through fear for 3,000 years, and what has it gotten you? Perfect obedience, sure, but also perfect stagnation. Your subjects are so terrified of making mistakes that they never try anything new. Your empire is stable, but it's not growing or improving. Marcus gestured toward the rainbow barriers. Sometimes the best solutions come from controlled chaos, systems that are stable enough to function but flexible enough to adapt, like percussive maintenance on a cosmic scale. The Emperor walked over to the crude, smiley face that Marcus had carved into his wall decoration. The plasma burns had cooled, leaving behind a permanent reminder of the day someone had decided to vandalize Imperial property and call it problem-solving. You damaged my ship, Zekthar said mildly. I improved your ship, Marcus corrected. That wall panel was just taking up space. Now it's providing psychological benefits to everyone who sees it. Morale improvement through strategic graffiti. Strategic graffiti. The Emperor traced one finger along the burned edge of the smile. I like that phrase. He turned back to face the arena full of beings who were still trying to process what they had witnessed. Citizens of Station Omega-7, you came here today expecting to face my champion in mortal combat. Instead, you have witnessed something unprecedented. Effective governance through humor. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Several people looked around nervously, as if expecting this to be some elaborate trap. Marcus Chen has demonstrated that laughter can be more disruptive than violence, more effective than fear, and more memorable than pain. He has shown me that my current methods, while impressive, are not optimal. The Emperor's voice carried clearly throughout the arena. Therefore, I am implementing immediate changes to the Imperial system. The murmurs became excited whispers. Changes to the Imperial system were rarer than supernovas. From this day forward, the trials of petition are hereby restructured. Instead of combat, petitioners will present solutions to real problems facing the Empire. Instead of death, failure will result in education and another opportunity to try again. Instead of fear, we will use creativity as the foundation of Imperial governance. He picked up the rubber duck and held it where everyone could see. This will be the symbol of the new Imperial debugging system. Any citizen who can make me laugh while solving a genuine problem will be granted not just an audience, but a position in the Imperial administration. The crowd erupted in cheers. People who had been preparing to die were suddenly celebrating the possibility of meaningful careers in galactic governance. Marcus found himself surrounded by beings wanting to shake his hand, slap his back, or perform whatever gesture of gratitude was customary in their species. The elderly Voltarian, Schechter, pushed through the crowd to reach him. Friend Marcus, the spice merchant said, his tentacles writhing with excitement, do you realize what you have done? You have changed the course of galactic history. I just fixed a broken system, Marcus replied, though he was beginning to understand the magnitude of what had happened. It's what I do. Emperor Zekthar approached, still carrying the rubber duck. Marcus Chen, I have a question for you. The crowd fell silent, sensing that something important was about to happen. Yes, Your Majesty. Would you be interested in the position of Imperial Chief of Debugging? Marcus blinked. Is that a real job? It is now. Your responsibilities would include identifying systemic problems throughout the Empire, developing creative solutions, and teaching others to think outside conventional parameters. You would report directly to me and have access to any resources necessary for your work. The offer was staggering. Chief of anything in the imperial government was a position of enormous power and responsibility. Chief of a brand new department created specifically for him was beyond anything Marcus had ever imagined. What about my shop? He asked. Keep it. The Empire needs people who understand how to fix things that others have given up on. Your shop will be your laboratory, your testing ground for ideas that might scale up to galactic proportions. Marcus looked around the arena one more time, at the rainbow barriers, the cheerful smiley face carved into the wall, the celebrating crowd, and the ancient emperor who was smiling at a rubber duck. 6 hours ago, he had been elbow-deep in a malfunctioning atmospheric processor, wondering how to pay next month's rent. Now he was being offered a job that would let him debug an entire civilization. Will I get to keep my tools? He asked. All of them, plus access to imperial workshops, research facilities, and anything else you might need. Marcus grinned and held out his hand. Your Majesty, you've got yourself a deal. As they shook hands, the immortal emperor and the human mechanic who had made him laugh, the rainbow barriers shifted to a warm golden color, as if the universe itself was celebrating. For the first time in 3,000 years, the galaxy was about to be governed by someone who understood that the best way to solve a problem was often to approach it from an angle no one expected. The rubber duck sat on the imperial throne, keeping silent watch over the beginning of a very different kind of empire. An empire where laughter was valued as highly as loyalty, where creativity was prized as much as strength, and where the most important qualification for advancement was the ability to see solutions that no one else had thought to try. Marcus Chen had set out to fix an atmospheric processor. Instead, he had debugged a galaxy. Years later, historians would struggle to explain how a single conversation in a space station repair shop had transformed galactic civilization. They would analyze Marcus's words, diagram his tactics, and write countless papers on the strategic use of humor in political revolution. But they would miss the real point, which Marcus had understood instinctively. Sometimes the most profound changes come not from grand gestures or brilliant strategies, but from simply treating other beings with kindness, creativity, and the basic respect of assuming they might enjoy a good laugh. The rubber duck never did offer any verbal advice, but its presence on the imperial throne served as a daily reminder that the universe was full of simple solutions to complicated problems. You just had to be willing to look at things from a different angle, approach them with an open mind, and remember that sometimes the best debugging tool was a willingness to smile. In the end, Marcus Chen had done exactly what he'd always done. He had fixed something that was broken. The fact that the broken thing happened to be a 3,000-year-old galactic tyranny was just another day at the office for a mechanic who specialized in impossible repairs.